Happy Crocheter here. I am so excited to be able to do this tutorial video for you for the Royal Regatta sweater vest. That's the vest that I am currently sporting right now, as you can see here. Very nice. Got this nice asymmetrical cable design going down the front and the back, and it's got some nice ribbing here that I will be happy to show you how to make. So what I'll be showing in this is some techniques for how to work the cable, how to work the ribbing, how to do armhole shaping, things like that. So definitely stick around for that. Also be on the lookout because this pattern is going to be in the April 2023 issue of the Crochet Foundry magazine. I'm so excited. It's my first ever magazine debut, so yay! Very happy about that. But in the meantime, I'm gonna stop yabbering and go ahead and help you get started on what you need to do this beautiful Royal Regatta vest. So to start your Royal Regatta sweater vest, you're going to need a few supplies. To start with, you're going to need a crochet hook. Today I'm going to be using my Furls Odyssey in Mint crochet hook. It is a US size D, which is a 3.25 millimeter. I will have a link in the description box below where you can purchase your own. They have various colors in the Odyssey, so you can pick any color you would like. They're very, very nice. You're also going to need some yarn. Today what I'm using is the Lion brand. This is their Perle 5-2 cotton. It is a category 1 fingering weight yarn. It's a 100% mercerized cotton, and each cone is going to be 1.10 pounds, and they contain 2,310 yards of yarn. For most of the sizes, you're only going to need one cone, but a couple of the larger sizes, you are going to need 2 cones in order to be able to get the yarn that you need out of this. But what I like about these is that when you work with them, you can actually set them on the floor or set them like just below you somewhere, and then you can pull the yarn just from the top and it just unwinds. That's what I really like about it. It's also very smooth yarn. It doesn't tangle very easily at all. So if you ever need to frog or anything like that, it comes apart. One thing I also like to do is I like to keep track of my rows because this is going to have some cable work and you're going to have to be doing some row counting to check when you're doing increasing and decreasing. So I always keep like kind of a little book for myself, and in it I just, keep track of rows and, check marks, dots, things like that. You can track your rows any way you want to. I just recommend whatever strategy you use for tracking your rows, definitely want to have that. For your notions, you're going to need a pair of scissors for cutting. You're also going to need some yarn needles for when you eventually need to weave in your ends. I use these just kind of bent tip ones from Clover. And to keep track of them, I like to store them in my little Furls needle case here. You can also purchase these using a link below in the description box. You will definitely need a stitch marker because there's going to be a place where we will be marking our stitches. This is just a cute little llama figure that I got at Michael's. So, you can find all kinds of little charms and jewels that you can use as makeshift stitch markers. Just make sure, since it's crochet, you do want to find one that has the little lobster clasp so that it can come in and out of your work. And finally, you are going to want a measuring tape of some kind. This is just kind of a generic one that I found somewhere a long time ago. Don't know where I got it from, but you can find any measuring tape to use to make sure that you're getting measurements correct. The sweater vest is constructed by first creating The sweater vest is constructed by creating a front and a back panel. In the pattern, I have you create the back panel first, but honestly, it doesn't really matter which order you do them in as long as you just create both panels. But they're both constructed very similarly. The front panel and the back panel will both begin with a set of ribbing rows that you'll create. Once you create those, you'll then turn it and start working into the sides of the rows, and you'll start just working rows back and forth, increasing at particular intervals on either side to create this tapered look. So you have a narrower waist and it goes up to the chest circumference. While you're working that, you'll also be working an asymmetrical cable It'll appear on one side on the front, and then it'll be on the opposite side on the back, so that way they can meet at the shoulders. But then you'll eventually work up until you get to the underarm, where we will then start doing some armhole decreases. Now we'll create our armhole openings here. Cable will continue up. And then for the front panel, we're going to need to, at one point, stop about midpoint here and start working decrease rows so that we can create this V-neck opening until we reach the end of the shoulder. Then later we'll go back, attach in that same center point, and then work decrease rows on the opposite sides, and then finish off with the shoulder there, and now we'll create our V-neck opening there. The back panel, worked very similarly, is going to have the bottom ribbing. It is also going to be worked with the same increase pattern with the cable asymmetrically going on the opposite side. We'll work until we get to the same underarm point. Start working our decreases to create the armholes. But then rather than stopping midpoint to create a V-neck, what we'll actually do is we will keep working pretty far up until we have just a few rows left. We'll stop at a certain point, kind of roughly about here, then just start working rows back and forth to create this rectangular opening. Then later we'll reattach our yarn somewhere a little bit more spaced out, come up, and then create our shoulder that way. Then that way, what this does on the back is it creates more of a shallow rectangular opening for the back of the neck, and then the V-neck is on the front. So that's essentially how this whole vest will be constructed. Then once you do that, you're going to take your panels, you're going to seam them together with the sides up to the underarm, and then at the tops by the shoulder. After they're seamed together, you're going to then go and work a rib, join as you go rib band around the armholes, and then finish off with a join as you go rib band for the V-neck that will wrap all the way around the neck opening. And then once you do that, you'll be finished with your sweater vest and it'll be ready to wear. When it comes to gauge, one of the things I always like to check is while the categories of yarn weights are pretty standard with the the Craft Yarn Council, I oftentimes find that because there are ranges of weights, it's a good idea to check what is called wraps per inch. So what you do is you would basically wrap, I have a little tool here, or you can just wrap it around a nice hard plastic ruler or something like that. But what you do is you take your yarn and you just gently wrap it around whatever you have and find out how many yard reps it takes to cover 1 entire inch. This one already has the inches marked off. So when I counted these, it comes out to 22 wraps per inch. Now that's a little bit on the lighter side of a fingering weight. So if you find that you are wrapping your fingering weight yarn and it comes to something like 18 wraps per inch, which is still within the fingering weight range, that yarn is going to be a little thicker than this one. So that is going to probably throw off your gauge in some way. So you'll want to account for that by going down a hook size potentially. If you do find a yarn that comes pretty close within about 1 to 2 wraps per inch, I wouldn't even go with 2, I would go with 1. So I have 22. So if you have one that's like 21 or 23, I think that's going to work pretty fine. But if you go any more than that, you're going to definitely need to adjust the hook size. The other thing you will then want to do is make a gauge swatch. Now I know this isn't the most exciting part of any project, but it's very important, especially if you're going to be working with a cotton yarn, because I have found that when I launder cotton, it tends to have, the shrinkage that happens with it. So what you want to do is you'll want to make up a gauge swatch, launder it the way you would normally. So for me, I threw this into the washer with a cold water wash, and then I did a tumble dry low in the dryer. And that way I could see like how the fabric is actually going to behave in the garment itself. And then what I'll do is I'll take it and I measure in a couple of different places and I find out where 4 inches is. So you would just line up. It's better to use like a hard ruler, but for now I'm just going to use this. So what you would do is you would line it up and you would see where does the 1 begin and where does the 4 inches end. So you would count, this is 1, and then this space counts as 1 as well, because that's going to be the width of the entire stitch. So this winds up coming to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way across. The total gauge in my swatch is 24 stitches, and then it would be 29 rows in 4 inches. Whether you're starting with the back panel or the front panel, they both begin the same way with the bottom ribbing. So to do that, what we'll do is we'll first create a slip knot and pop that onto our hook here and do that. And then I'm going to chain 18 because that's the number of stitches that I want the ribbing to be. But if you want your ribbing to be, smaller or larger, you can chain really whatever number you want. It's up to you. I just do 18 because it gives me about a 2 to 2.5 inch rib. So that's going to be 2, 3, 4. Okay. Now, most of the time you're going to do one extra for a turning chain, but in this case, we're just going to go directly into the first stitch. So what you're going to do is you're going to look on the back of the chain, and you should be able to see these little humps. So this like little tiny one right here in the middle between the two outer loops here, that's actually going to be what we work into. So we're going to do our half double crochets across. So to do that, we'll yarn over, insert it through that back hump of our chain. This first one can be a little tricky. There we go. And once you do that, you'll yarn over, pull up your loop, yarn over, pull through all 3 to complete your first half double crochet. And then you're just going to work a half double crochet into every back hump of your chain all the way across. Now, if you find that this part is a tad too difficult, or you're just like, you know what, I don't have the patience to deal with this, you can feel free to just work your chains normally. You'll want to go ahead and do an extra turning chain if you do it that way, though, if you work through the top loop or the 2 loops that are on the bottom. The reason I like to do this is because then when you finish, you have, let me show you here, this cleaner edge where they look like the V's of a stitch. So they're easier to see for later when you do seaming, or if you wanted to do a border on something, you could do that as well. But if you're okay with just, you don't necessarily need that, you don't have to do it through the back humps. If you're just like, nah, I'll just work into them like normal. So what I'll do is I'll complete those 18 half double crochets all the way to the end. And then when I get to the end, I'll show you what I do there. All right, so I've reached my last stitch here. So before I work into that, I want to show you what I'm going to do to create a more polished look to the end whenever I get to the tail. So what I'll do is I'm going to do my final stitch by inserting it into that final loop. But before completing it, I'll take the tail and yarn it over my hook and then complete my stitch around it. So then that way it kind of tucks the knot into the corner there and creates a little bit more of a clean edge. That's just like a little extra tidbit of advice I like to give, to be like, hey, look, now it's just a nice corner instead of that random knot and tail just kind of hanging off on the end. You'll eventually weave that tail in anyway, but that's just what I like to do to finish it off. All right, so then what we'll do to continue our ribbing is we've done our half double crochets. So now what we're going to do is our linked slip stitch row. So to do that, what we're going to do is chain 1, turn our work, and then we're going to just work a single crochet into the very first stitch just to get it established. But then what we're going to do, we would normally work a slip stitch by working into this next stitch, yarning over and just pulling it through everything. But first what we're going to do is link it to the previous stitch by pulling up a loop through the stitch we just worked. So where we put that single crochet in, we're going to pull a loop through. Then we're going to insert our hook into the next stitch and complete our slip stitch by yarning over and pulling through both of the loops on the hook. Okay. So you'll insert into the stitch you just worked through, yarn over and pull up a loop. Then you're going to work your slip stitch through the next stitch by inserting, yarning over, and pulling through everything on the hook. And then you're just going to repeat that process, pulling up a loop in the previously worked stitch, slip stitching into the next one, all the way across until you reach the very end. I've reached the end of my row, so what I'll do is complete my final linked slip stitch by inserting into the previously worked stitch, pulling up a loop, inserting into the last stitch, and completing my slip stitch. And if I turn it here, what you'll see are these 2 V rows all worked across. And that's going to create what's going to look like a 2x2 ribbing that you might see in knit. So now what we're going to do is we're going to chain 2, which will not count as a stitch. And then we're going to work double crochets into the back loop only of each slip stitch across. So we're going to yarn over, insert through the back loop only, complete our double crochet, and just do that all the way across to the end, working in the back loops only. All right, so I have completed my 18 double crochets in the back loop only, and as you can see, it's created this nice little 2x2 ribbing look right here where this is popping out to the front and then the double crochets sit back. And then what we'll do is we're going to chain 1 and turn, and then we will repeat the linked slip stitch row again. So as we saw before, we would start with our single crochet. Then we're going to insert our hook into the same stitch we just worked into, pull up a loop, and then do our slip stitch into the next one. Okay. And then we just do that over and over again. Pull up a loop in the previously worked stitch, work our slip stitch into the next one, all the way across. And once you're all the way across to the end, you're going to turn, chain 2, and then double crochet into the back loop only. We're going to go through our back loop only, double crochet, and then just keep doing that all the way across, making sure that our stitch count is staying at 18 or whatever stitch count you did to make your ribbing. And that's all it is to it. So you pretty much just keep repeating those 2 rows, the linked slip stitches and the double crochets in the back loop only, until you reach the row count listed in your pattern for your size. In your pattern, it's going to list the number of rows that you're going to be completing, how many of these repeats you're going to do, but all of them are going to end the same way. What you're going to end with is you'll do 1 final row of linked slip stitches to get this final ribbing look. And then rather than working a row of double crochets in the back loop only, you're going to work a final row of half double crochets in the back loop only, just like how we started here. So I'm going to quickly just kind of show you that here. So I'm going to go ahead and chain 1, turn, do my linked slip stitch row by starting with a single crochet, and then do my linked slip stitches all the way across. All right, and then there's our final one. Okay, and this time instead of turning and chaining 2 to work doubles, we're going to just chain 1. And we're going to do a half double crochet into the back loop only across all of these linked slip stitches. So there we go. Oh, I accidentally did a different type of stitch there. Okay, there we go. Half double crochet. Okay, we're good. So half double crochet, back loop only. You should still again have 18 or whatever number you did for your ribbing. And then once you do that, and obviously yours is going to be longer because you'll have the full ribbing, but once you finish that, your ribbing is done and you are ready to move on to setting up for the rest of the panel. Once we finish with our ribbing, it's now time to start working the setup for our panels. So to work the setup part, what you're going to do is turn the ribbing to the side to where you're going to be working into the edge of all the rows that we just did. And there's going to be a certain pattern you'll follow to make sure you get the correct stitch count. So we'll be working double crochets into the edge here. So to do so, we'll start with our chain 2 that doesn't count into the side of this half double crochet row. What we're going to do is work 1 double crochet just into that first half double crochet right there. Then we're going to be coming upon our linked slip stitch row. So since the linked slip stitches started with this single crochet, that's actually a perfect place for us to insert our next double crochet. Just insert it into the single crochet there. Finish our double. So now we'll have it worked there. So we'll have 2 stitches so far. We have a double worked into our half double row, a double worked into our linked slip stitch row. And now we'll be on our double crochet row in between the linked slip stitches. And there's usually this kind of gap right here, but if I try to put 2 double crochets into that gap, that's going to create kind of like a little bit of a wider hole. So what I like to do is over here to the right, you can see where the single crochet was worked into the top of the double crochet from the previous row, and it leaves this gap right about here. So what I'll do is to work 2 double crochets into the side. I'll work it first into that gap. So that will count as the first one around the double crochet side here. And then I'll work another one around the actual post of that stitch. And that will count as the 2 double crochets worked into the side of the double crochet row. So the first one was around the top part, and the second one was around the middle part here. Then we got this big wide gap right here. That's just the back loop of the linked slip stitches row before that. So we're going to just kind of skip there. Instead, find that single crochet that was started here on this linked slip stitch row. We'll work our next double crochet into that one. Complete that. There's 1. And then we'll work it into that gap right here. That's 2. And then we'll work it into the gap right here around the double crochet. So basically, even if you don't do it exactly like that, as long as you're doing 1 double crochet into the side of the linked slip stitch ridges here, and then 2 double crochets for the double crochet rows in between, you should get the correct stitch count. And your stitch count will be based on your pattern and which size you're making. So make sure you follow that so that way you get the correct number of stitches by the end of this setup row, because that's going to matter when it comes to making sure it's the correct size, making sure that the cable pattern is lined up correctly along the shoulder, all of that. So I'm going to go ahead and finish this off camera, and then I will meet you back up to show you what to do for the next row of the setup. I've made it now to the end of the ribbing. So there's going to be 1 more of these linked slip stitch ridges for me to work into. So I'll go ahead and work my double crochet into the side there. But now instead of a double crochet row at the end, remember that we started with a half double crochet row. So instead of working 2, I'm just going to work 1 final double crochet into the side of that row. And then that will get my count to be the correct number all the way across the entire rib. So that is setup row 1. To do setup row 2, what we're going to do is we will chain 1, turn our work, and then simply single crochet all the way across. Yep, that's it. That's all you're doing for setup row 2 is just single crocheting in every single double crochet you made all the way across to the end. So I'll let you go ahead and do that. I'll finish that up off camera and then meet you at the end for setup row 3. To begin the setup row 3, you're going to want to have a stitch marker handy. So I've got my cute little llama one right here. And your pattern is going to tell you to single crochet a certain number of times. So I'm just going to go with 4. Let's go 1, 2, 3, 4. All right. And then it'll tell you to place a stitch marker in the last stitch that you just made. So what that's going to do is it's going to, from now on, mark which stitch is the first stitch of the cable section of your panel. So it's very important to make sure that you keep track of where that stitch is, so that way your panels have the cable lined up correctly going up. So once you do that, it's then going to tell you to do a single crochet. So we'll do a single crochet into the next one. And then the cable is going to be different sizes depending on which size of vest you're going to do, but they're all worked essentially the same way. They're all going to start with some front post doubles, then there'll be some singles, and they'll tell you exactly how many singles are in between things. So just make sure you pay attention to that part. But what I am going to walk you through is how to do the setup with the front post stitches. So the next stitch we would work into would be this one. So what it's telling you is to work a front post double crochet 2 rows down and 1 stitch to the left. So if we look at where this stitch is, if we go 2 rows down, that's going to be this double crochet right here. But then I want to go 1 stitch to the left of that. So I'm going to go to the double crochet that is 1 stitch to the left, and that is where I'm going to work my first front post double crochet. So to do that, I will yarn over, go around that post, yarn over and draw up a loop, and then I will complete my double crochet like normal. And it will say to do that twice. So to do that twice, you're essentially just going to work around that stitch, and then you'll just work around the one next to that, because that's the one that's 2 rows down and 1 stitch to the left of the next stitch we would have worked. So we'll just do that. And what this does is it starts creating the lean in our cable. So the cable is going to be kind of like this diamond pattern where your cables go out and then they come back in. So to create that effect, what you have to do is you have to lean the front post stitches to the right starting off. So that means you have to make the bottom of them farther to the left and then the top ones farther to the right. So that's why we have to do it that way. Then with every front post stitch that we do, we always make sure we skip the stitches directly behind it. So we have 2 front posts here. So if we look behind it, we're going to see 2 single crochets. We look at the top, we can see the V's of them. We're going to leave those unworked and then work into the next one where it says to work our single crochets. So here we're going to work a single crochet. And there we go. And for my pattern, I only need to work, I'm just going to go with 1. For some of them, they might have 2. What you're going to then do is it says to work a front post double crochet around the double crochet that is 2 rows below 4 times. Now, it doesn't say to move left or right. So this one we are going to work just directly below. So the next stitch we would work into would be this one. So if we go directly below that, we can see it's this double crochet right here. So these are not going to have any lean in them. These are just going to go straight up and down. So we're going to yarn over, go straight down to that stitch, go around the post, yarn over, pull up a loop, and then complete our double crochet like normal. And then we will do that 4 total times. So there's 1, we'll do that into the next one, 2, 3, 4. All right. Once we've done those, we'll make sure we skip all the 4 single crochets that are directly behind it. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Work our single crochet into that next stitch. And now we're to the point where it says we are going to work something similar to what we did over here, but this time we're going to be going 2 rows down and 1 stitch to the right. So this is going to create our leaning going this way. So if we look at our next stitch, it would be this one right here. If we go directly down, that would be this double crochet. And we want to go 1 stitch to the right of that. So 1 stitch to the right is going to be this double crochet right here. So by doing that, we're going to our front post around that one. And again, we do that twice. So we will now have 2 front post double crochets that will lean more to the left. And then we'll skip the 2 that are behind it. So these 2 unworked single crochets back here, we'll work our singles into this one. So then it'll tell us to work a certain number of single crochets across. All right. And then it'll tell us to repeat everything that we did over here. So we're just going to do exactly the same thing we did with this section of the cable in this part of the panel. So we're going to again do a front post double around the stitch that is 2 rows below and 1 stitch to the left of that. So we'll do a front post double crochet around that one. And we'll do that twice. Skip the 2 stitches that are behind it, work our single crochets. Then working in the stitch directly below, 2 rows below, we will do 4 front post double crochets. And we will skip the 4 single crochets behind those, work our single crochets. Then we will work around the next one that is 2 rows below but 1 stitch to the right. So here's our stitch, here's 2 rows below, here's 1 stitch to the right. So we will front post double around that one. And then the one next to it to create our last leaning stitches. And then we'll skip the 2 unworked single crochets behind those and then work single crochets for the remainder of the panel. So we're done with the cable setup part. So now we're just on single crochets. And I'll just do that all the way to the end. I'll work that off camera, but then the last setup row is just a repeat of setup row 2. So all that is just going back, turning, chaining 1, and single crocheting all the way back across until you reach the end. And then I'm going to show you in a moment what to do once you get to this stitch marker part, so that way you can make sure you're working into it correctly, moving the stitch marker the way that you're supposed to. But then once you're done with that, you are complete with setup row 4, and you are ready to begin your panel. Just in case there is maybe some confusion about working into the stitch marker stitch, I'll go ahead and show what I'm talking about. So I see here that I've got this marked stitch with my stitch marker. Got 1 more stitch that I need to work before I get there. So what I'll do is I will single crochet into that stitch right before it. Then what I'll do is before working into that, I'll go ahead and take out my stitch marker, set it aside there, work a stitch. In this case, it's a single crochet. Then I go ahead and take my stitch marker and just put it back into that same stitch I just made. It's a little finicky holding it all at once, but there we go. Just put it right there into that same stitch, and there we go. That's it. It's marked, and we are done. Now comes the part that, in my opinion, is one of the more fun aspects of this design, but can also be one of the more challenging parts, especially if you are not used to working cable work in crochet. But don't worry, I'm going to walk you through all of the cable rows each at a time and show you exactly what you're going to be doing when it comes to all of the special stitches that we'll need to do. So one of the first things to note is that you are going to basically work your single crochets of your panel all the way until you reach the stitch marked stitch. The stitch marked stitch is always the first stitch of the cable. So I'm going to go ahead and pull that out. I'm just going to set it aside and then work my cable from here and make sure I put my stitch marker back into that first stitch once I make it. For the purpose of this video, I'm just going to leave it out because it can clack and make a bunch of noise. But for you, make sure you're always putting it right back into the first stitch that you make of your cable. So for cable row 1, they all start the same way. They'll start with a single crochet. So you'll work a single crochet into that first stitch. And then it says to work 2 front post double crochets. So all the front post stitches you work from now on, unless they are specifically telling you where to put it, are going to be worked in the next unworked front post stitch 2 rows below. And so in our case, it would be this first front post double crochet we made in our setup rows earlier before. So what we'll do is we'll yarn over, go around that front post double crochet that has been unworked, yarn over, pull up a loop, and then we will complete our double crochet. And that makes our first front post double. And then we'll do that again to make our second one around the next unworked one right here. And that is going to create a further lean to the right. So it's going to continue that diamond pattern going over to the right. And just like every other front post stitch, we will make sure that we will skip these 2 single crochets behind it. And then we'll work a certain number of single crochets. Your pattern will tell you, depending on your size, how many you need to do. And you will now get to these 4 front post stitches that were in the middle here. So now we're going to do what's called a cable cross. So it will be abbreviated CX in your pattern. What that means is that you're going to create kind of this twisted X look where some stitches will be going to the right and then other stitches will go to the left, crossing over it to create this twisted X look. So what we'll do is we will find these 4 stitches. We will skip these first 2 and we will work our front post double crochet around the 3rd one right here. And then we'll work our next one around the 4th double crochet right there. Then to create the cross, we are going to work back into this first and second stitch that we skipped earlier, going in front of the stitches we just made. So we're going to yarn over, go around the post of the first double crochet, complete our front post double crochet here. Then we'll kind of spread it out, make sure we can see, and then we'll see that we have the second one to work around right here. So we'll yarn over, go around that second one, complete our front post double crochet, and then we can see that we've created this kind of crossed twist. It's a little hard to see right now because until we work the rest of the cable, it's just going to look kind of like a blah mess, but don't worry, it should look like this. Then what we'll do is we will, since we worked 4 stitches, we will skip the 4 single crochets behind there. So we'll skip 1, 2, 3, 4, and work our single crochets starting in this next one right here. So then we'll work our single crochets until it tells us to start the next front post stitches. Okay. So then our next 2 unworked stitches are right here. So we'll work 2 front post double crochets, 1 around each of those. So we'll do around this one, and then around this one. And then that is this first part of our cable section, and we're already starting to see this diamond figure start to form out with the little twist in the middle there. Then it's going to tell you to work a certain number of single crochets. So we will skip the 2 stitches behind our front post doubles, work our singles, and now we've reached to where they're going to have us repeat in the pattern exactly what we did before. So we've got the 2 front post doubles, we'll work some singles, we'll do our cable cross around these 4, work some singles, and then finish off with some front post doubles around these last 2 front post doubles below. So because I've already worked that over here, I'm just going to go a little more quickly through this one just to get through it. So we'll do a front post double around the next one, front post double around the next front post double, skip the 2 stitches behind, work our single crochets, then I get to my cable cross section where I'm going to yarn over and do my front post doubles around the 3rd and 4th stitches first. Then going in front of the stitches I just made and working back into these 2 skipped ones, I will do my next 2 front post doubles. And now that's my twist, and so then I will skip the next 4, 2, 3, 4, work my singles, and then I have these last 2 front post doubles to work around, so I will do my front post double crochets around those. Skip the 2 stitches behind them, 1, 2, and then I'll work a single crochet. And then after that, your cable row 1 is now complete. And then the rest of the panel will just be worked by doing single crochets all the way across to the end. Now, what makes this cable really fantastic is that you only do the cable work on the right side. So what that means is that you will only do it on the odd numbered cable rows, so 1, 3, 5, 7, etc. The even numbered cable rows are all going to be worked exactly the same. They are just single crochet across to get back to the beginning. The reason I like to do it that way is because then anytime you're doing cable work, you can see exactly what you're doing on the correct side here. Whereas if I was on the wrong side, I can't really see anything going on with the cable. So it's a lot easier when you can see what you're doing. So there's no back posting or anything like that with this one. So all it is just working singles across, turning it, and then you begin the next cable row. So what I'll do is go ahead and work cable row 2, single crocheting across off camera, and then I will meet you back up to do cable row 3. For cable row 3, you're going to work again until you get to your marked stitch, and we'll go ahead and remove that one. And this row, we begin immediately with a front post double crochet. So we see our 2 unworked stitches down here. We're going to yarn over, go around this first one, complete our double crochet, and then that would be the stitch that we would mark for the first stitch of our cable. I'm going to just leave my stitch marker aside, but just so you know, that's the one that you're going to want to make sure you mark for the future. So then after we do that, we will go ahead and work our front post double around the next one right here. And that will be the 2 front post double crochets at the start of cable 3. And then we'll skip the 2 that are behind it. And then it will tell you to work a certain number of single crochets. So I'll do that until it gets to the next cable cross. Now that we've got our single crochets, we have reached our cable cross here in the middle. And so this, I will admit, is one of the more challenging parts to this cable, but it is well worth it for the look that you get in the end. And this is going to be where we do another cable cross on top of this cable cross. So you look carefully, you can see that we have these 2 front post doubles that are crossing here to the left. Those are the 3rd and the 4th stitches that we made from below. The 1st and 2nd stitches are hidden behind these 2. So if I kind of work my hook underneath those, pull those aside, we can see that they are wrapped right here and right here. Sorry, that's a little blurry. Right here and right here. So what we will be doing is working the first 2 front post doubles around these 2 that are crossing in front. Then we'll go back and work our 3rd and 4th ones around these that are crossing behind. So to do that, we go ahead and yarn over, go around this first one that's on top, pull up a loop, complete our double crochet. Then for our second one, we'll go around the next one that's on top, yarn over, pull up a loop, complete our double crochet. And now we need to work our crossed front post doubles around here. So here's the steps that I took to be able to make this as easy on myself as possible. So I go ahead and do my yarn over to get that done. Then I go around and I stick my hook behind these 2 stitches that I worked around. Okay, so it's behind there. And I tuck them aside to find my next post stitches so I can see that my next post stitch is this one right here. It's a little difficult to see, but you can see it's wrapped around this stitch right here with this loop. So what I'll do is stick my hook right under that post, grab it, pull it through. It's going to be a little tight, but I can pull it through so that it is now visible right here. Then I'll go ahead and yarn over, draw a loop through that, and then I can just kind of let it go. It'll hold on to this loop right here. And now I've got my 3 loops on my hook for my double crochet. So I will go ahead and complete that. Whew, there we go. For the next one, we're going to repeat that same process, making sure that we're going not underneath any of this stitching that we just worked here. So we'll go ahead and yarn over, go behind these 2 stitches that are on top here, kind of pull them out of the way, and then look for those post stitches that were worked earlier. So we had this first one that we just worked around. So we're going to work around this one right here. So we're going to put our hook underneath that one, grab it, tug it underneath these 2 stitches that we had before. It's going to, again, be very tight, but once it's there, all you have to do is yarn over and pull a loop through it, and then you can let it go. It's good. It's good. Now, you'll have your 3 loops on your hook. Yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. And then if we kind of straighten it back out, we can see that we've created this kind of cool little twisted column here in the middle. Right there. And that creates that little cable effect. So again, I know with cotton yarn, it's not super stretchy, so some of that can be a little difficult to do. But if you can get it like this, then that's literally the hardest part of this cable. The other things, the V stitches, even the clusters, those are going to be ones that you can definitely do more easily than this one. But just so you know, believe in you, you can do it. And yeah, there you go. So, and you'll get to see it again a second time when we have to do it over here. All right, so once we do that, we've made 4 stitches. So we will skip 4 single crochets back here, work our single crochets, all right. Once I do that, I then will be at these 2 front post stitches. So I'll go ahead and work my front post double crochets around those. And then I will skip the 2 single crochets behind there. So these 2 unworked ones right there. And then I'll do a certain number of single crochets. And then now we're back to where we are going to repeat everything that we did over here. So everything we did here, we're going to do right here. So we'll just do that again. So I'll work my front post double crochets around these next 2 front post doubles, 2 rows below. Skip the 2 single crochets behind those. Work single crochets until I get to the cable crossing. And then now I will do my cable cross here. So I'm going to find those 2 stitches that are on top, work front post double crochet around each of those. To get to the next 2 that are tucked back here, I'll yarn over, go under the 2 ones that are on top, grab the front post, grab the front post double crochet here, tug it underneath so it pulls out to over here. And then once I do that, yarn over, pull up a loop, and then complete my double crochet. And then repeat that again, yarn over, go underneath those 2 stitches, find my 4th front post there, grab it, tug it underneath so that I can complete my double crochet around it. And there we go, all done. And then we will skip the next 4 stitches. So 1, 2, 3, 4, work single crochets. Until I get to these last 2 post stitches where I will work my last 2 front post double crochets. Skip those 2, and then the rest of the panel is just single crocheting across. So there we go. That is the end of cable row 3. So I'm going to go ahead and finish that out, work cable row 4, which is just single crocheting across, and then meet you back for cable row 5. To begin cable row 5, we are going to start by working a single crochet into that first stitch. And then it will tell us to work 2 front post double crochets. So we'll work our 2 front posts around these 2 unworked ones. What this is going to start doing is it's going to start leaning our stitches back to the left to create that diamond effect. So it's done working to the right. It's now going to start bending and working to the left. So we'll skip the 2 single crochets behind it. And then we're going to work a certain number of single crochets. And now we're to our cable crossings, but now we're done doing cable crossings. We're going to actually end this by doing some clusters. So how the clusters work is we're going to be doing what are called front post clusters. So we need to find the post of the stitch that we need to work around. So the first cluster is always around the first front post double crochet, which is tucked back here behind these 2 stitches here. So what I'll do is I'll kind of work my hook around there, just kind of tug it out for me to be able to see. There we go. Now that I know exactly where it needs to go, I will yarn over, go around that post, yarn over, draw up a loop. I'll have 3 loops on my hook, yarn over, and draw through the first 2 only. So that's going to be the first double crochet of my cluster. Then I'm going to do that 4 more times. So these are going to be 5 double crochet clusters. So we'll work our first one, yarn over, go around that post, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, draw through 2. Then I'm going to yarn over, go around the post again to make our 3rd one. Yarn over, go around that post again to make our 4th one. and then yarn over, go around that post a final time to make our 5th one. So you should see we have this first loop that was from the stitch before, and then we should have 5 other loops from the ones that we started. So this is the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th. So you should have a total of 6 loops on your hook when you're done making the front post cluster. Then after that, you're going to yarn over and draw through all 6 loops on the hook. And that creates our lovely little front post cluster here. Then, because this is a front post stitch, we make sure we skip the single crochet that's directly behind it. So it's just going to be this single crochet that's right here. And then what we'll do is we'll work 2 single crochets around the next 2. So here's the next one. So we'll work a single crochet around that, or sorry, inside that one. And then we'll work a single crochet into the next stitch. And then we're going to make our second front post cluster, but we're going to do that around the 4th stitch. So we're going to skip 2 of the front post stitches. One of them you can't even really see anyway, so that's easy to do. And then this next one is this one right here. So we will skip that one as well. So the last stitch is this one right here. That's the one we're going to work our cluster around. So I'll go ahead and yarn over, go around that last front post double crochet, yarn over, draw up a loop, yarn over, draw through 2 only. And then do that again 4 more times. Oh my gosh, get it together. There we go. 2. 3. 4. 5. Okay, so I should now have 6 loops on my hook, the 5 from the double crochets that I created and the 1 from the previous stitch. And now I'll yarn over and pull through all 6 loops on my hook. And that creates my second cluster. So it creates this little cluster at the end of our little twist here. And then I'll skip the stitch that's directly behind it, work a single crochet, and work single crochets until it tells me in the pattern. Okay. And then the next thing is we are going to be creating what is called a front post V stitch. So this cable row just has all the fun things going on. You're doing clusters and you're doing front post V stitches. So to do a front post V stitch, that's going to count for these next 3 stitches that we have along here. So what's going to happen is you're going to have a double crochet that's going to count for this first stitch. You'll put a single crochet in the middle and then another front post double crochet to cover this 3rd stitch. So it'll create a little V pattern with a single crochet in the middle. So to do that, we're going to find our next front post stitch that's unworked, yarn over, go around, pull up a loop, complete our first double crochet. Make sure we skip the one that was behind it, go into this next one and work a single crochet. And then we will work back around the same stitch we created this first one around. So this first front post stitch was around this one. So we're going to create another front post double crochet around that same stitch. And then that creates our little V right there. Then we're going to skip that one and we'll work a front post double crochet around the next front post double crochet. And that completes this first diamond in the pattern. We've now got our clusters here and we've got a V stitch, and then we are ready to continue to the next part. Now, this next part, for some sizes, it's going to just go straight into this next front post double crochet. For some sizes, there'll be 2 more single crochets to work. So pay attention to what your size tells you to do. For the size that I'm making here, I'm skipping 2 stitches, so that leaves me basically nothing left. So there's no more single crochets for me to work. So I'll just go directly into the front post, double crochet, next. And then for this second one, I'm going to be doing another front post V-stitch. So once again, if I look here, we've got the skipped stitch from last V-stitch, the front post we just that we did last time, and then the next front post that we just made. So this is the first stitch that the V-stitch is going to cover. That's going to be the middle single crochet, and that's going to be the next stitch that the V-stitch covers. So we'll yarn over, go around this post stitch, create our double crochet. Then we'll find that middle stitch right here, do a single crochet into it. And then working back around that same stitch that we worked around before, we will yarn over, go around, pull up a loop, and finish our double crochet. And that will create our V-stitch here. Then we'll make sure we skip the one that double crochet covers, single crochet across until we get to the cable cross part. And then this is just going to be a repeat of the clusters that we did over here. So just like before, we're going to work a cluster around the first post stitch, single crochet 2, skip 2, and then we'll work a cluster around the fourth post stitch. So I'll just go through those. So we'll find our first stitch here, out there, there we go. Work our cluster, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Should have 6 loops on our hook. Yarn over, pull through all 6. Skip the single crochet behind it, work 2 single crochets. Skip the next 2 post stitches and work around this fourth post stitch right here. We're going to do our second cluster. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Got to make sure you don't accidentally grab maybe like other loops from previous stitches. Make sure you're only going around that post. There we go. And 5. There we go. Should have 6 loops on my hook. Yarn over, draw through all 6. Skip 1. Work our single crochets. And then we finish it off by just working front post double crochets around the last 2 front post double crochets. Yep. Okay, skip 2, work a single, and that is the end of the cable section for cable row 5. So now what we'll do is we will just work single crochets to the end of the panel, chain 1, turn, work single crochets all the way back across, and then we will be ready for cable row number 7. Cable row 7 begins with 2 single crochets, so we'll go ahead and work those 2. Then it says 2 front post double crochets, so we'll work those around these next 2 front post double crochets here. Skip the 2 singles behind it, and then it will say to work a number of single crochets across. So you'll go ahead and just work those single crochets. Once we work those single crochets, it's then going to have us work 2 front post double crochets. But if you'll read in the note right after that, it says to work the second front post double crochet around the center of the single crochet of the front post V stitch. All that means is that if you'll remember, we had our V stitch right here, and we had this center single crochet right here. So what we'll do is we'll work our post stitches around this first post stitch of the V, and then we'll work the second one around the post of this single crochet that's in the middle. So we'll go ahead and yarn over, go around the first post of the V stitch. And then for our second one, we're going to yarn over and go around this single crochet. So one thing to be careful of is that when you're going around this single crochet, you're going to want to make sure you go underneath this kind of small loop of yarn that's right here. You can see that. Let me see. There we go. Small loop. We want to go under it because that loop is part of the top of this double crochet. So we want to make sure we're not going around that on accident. We just want to go around the legs of our single crochet. So we'll go around that, yarn over, pull up a loop, and then complete our double crochet. We will then skip our 2 single crochets, and then it will say to work some single crochets until you get to the next part. Once you do your single crochets, you'll now be to these middle 4 stitches. So these middle 4 stitches are going to create the top of our diamond in the middle. So it says now to work 4 front post double crochets. So those 4 are worked around these 2 and these 2. So we'll go ahead and work our first front post double crochet here. Our second one goes around this one to the right. Third one goes around this first one on the left. And then our fourth one goes around the last one on the left here. And there we go. Created the top of the diamond. And then because we worked 4 stitches, we will make sure we skip 4 single crochets here. And then it will say to work some single crochets. So we'll work those. And now we are going to be doing 2 more front post double crochets. And again, in the notes, it will say you'll work your first front post double around the center single of the front post V stitch. So all that means, again, is just we're going to do what we just did over here, but the opposite side. So this time our first one is worked around the single crochet here. So we'll go around the single crochet, making sure we're going underneath that loop. Make our post stitch. And then we will go around the post stitch of this part of the V, go around that, and that completes our second front post double crochet. So now it'll look like they are connected to the side of this part of the cable. We will skip 2, and then it says to work some single crochets across. And now we're to our last post stitches. So all that is going to be a front post double crochet around each of those. So we'll do front post there, front post there, skip the 2 singles behind it, and then work our 2 single crochets. And then the rest of the panel we complete like normal. And then we work our wrong side cable row, which is just the single crochets. And then I will work all that off camera, just like before. And I'll meet you back up for cable row 9. Cable row 9 begins with 3 single crochets. And following that, you do 2 front post double crochets around these next 2 front post double crochets. And then you'll skip the 2 that are behind those, of course. And then after that, you'll work a certain number of single crochets. Then you will work 2 front post double crochets again. So around these next 2 that were worked before, we're going to work 2 front post double crochets. Skip the 2 that are behind it, and then we'll work a certain number of single crochets until we get to these 4 front post doubles here in the middle. Once we're there, we're going to create another cable cross. So just like the cable crosses we had here in the previous parts of the cable, this one's going to now be in this middle part. So as a reminder how to do that, you're going to skip these first 2 front post double crochets, work into the 3rd and the 4th one. Then working in front of these stitches that we just made, we're going to work front post doubles around the 2 that we skipped earlier. And since we made 4 stitches, we'll go ahead and skip the 4 single crochets that are behind there, work a number of single crochets. And then we are back to this part of the cable where we will repeat everything we did on this side. So we'll just do 2 front post double crochets around these 2, work some single crochets, and then work the final 2 front post double crochets and finish out with some singles. So I'll go ahead and work those up quickly here. So 2 front post doubles. Skip 2 singles. Front post doubles. And single crochets. And that completes cable row number 9. So you'll work everything else as normal, work back across single crochets, and then I will do that off camera and meet you up for cable row number 11. Cable row 11 begins with 4 single crochets. Then you're going to work 2 front post double crochets, a certain number of single crochets, and then 2 front post double crochets. So we'll go ahead and do those. So 2 front post double crochets. Skip 2. And then after that, we're going to skip the ones behind there and work a certain number of single crochets until we get to the center cable crossing again. And then we're just going to do this cable cross the same way we did when we had to do the second cable crossing in the previous ones. So we're going to yarn over, find these 2 that are crossing on top, go around that post stitch, complete our front post double, go around the next one, then going underneath these 2 stitches, we'll yarn over, go under, find the next post stitch that we need to work around here, grab it and kind of tug it. Sorry, should show that more on camera there. Grab it and tug it underneath. so that we can complete our double crochet around it. Repeat that again, make sure we're not going behind this one in any way. So we'll yarn over, go behind these two, find the last post stitch we need to work around here, go underneath it, grab it, tug it underneath, yarn over, go through, and then complete our double crochet. I'm gonna flatten that back out. Skip the 4 singles that are behind it, work single crochets, and then we're back to repeating what we did at the beginning. So we're just going to do 2 front post doubles, some singles, and then 2 front post doubles around those last 2. And then finish it off with 4 single crochets. And there you have it. That is the end of cable row 11. So I'll work the rest off camera and meet you back for cable row 13. Cable row 13 is going to begin with 3 single crochets. And then we are going to work a front post V-stitch around the next front post double crochet that we'll encounter. So as a reminder, just like when we did them down here, we are going to work across the next 3 stitches to create our V. The front post, the center single, and then a front post. So we'll do a front post double crochet around that first front post double. Work a single crochet around that single, or sorry, a center single crochet into that single. Then we'll work another front post double crochet around the same stitch we worked around. And then that creates our V-stitch. Then we will go ahead and work a front post double crochet around the next front post double crochet. For some sizes, you will then work single crochets here in the middle, but for this size that I'm doing, you don't have to do that part. The next part is just skipping across those and working your front post double into this next one. Even if you do work those single crochets for the sizes that need it, you'll still, once you're done with that, work in the same post stitch for the next front post double crochet. So here we go. We'll work that. And then we will work a V-stitch around the next front post double crochet. So again, we will do a front post double, single crochet into that center single crochet, and then a front post double around the same front post stitch that we just worked around. And then we will skip the single crochet that's behind the V-stitch, the last front post double we just did, and we will work single crochets until we get to the cable cross. Once we're here, we're now going to work the clusters like we did in the previous cable sections. So just like before, we're going to work a cluster around the first front post double crochet. We'll do 2 singles, skip the 2 middle ones that are right here, and then we will work the last cluster in this last front post double crochet. So as a reminder, we'll yarn over, find our first post stitch, go around it, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through just the first 2 to create the part of the first double crochet in our cluster. Then we'll yarn over, go around the same post stitch, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2. We should now have 2 double crochets started. And then we'll do a third, fourth, and fifth. There we go. Once we do, as a reminder, we will have our 6 loops, the 5 from the double crochets and 1 from the previous stitch. We will yarn over and pull through all 6 loops. Then we will skip the stitch that's behind it, do 2 single crochets, and then we should be the place where we can now do the final cluster. So that's going to be around not this one, but it's going to be around this last one that's to the left here. So we'll do our front post cluster. So 1, 2, 3. This part is going to take a little bit of patience and taking your time. 4, sorry, no, that's 3. Okay, 3, 4, and 5. We should have 6 loops on our hook. Yarn over, draw through all 6. Skip the single that's directly behind it. Then we will single crochet. However many it tells you to do in your pattern. And then once you do that, your clusters are done in the middle, and then you're able to repeat the V-stitch pattern that was over here on this other part of the cable over here. So that's just going to be a repeat of what we've already done. So we'll go ahead and do our V-stitch around the next front post double crochet. Our front post double around the next one. Do whatever singles we might need to do in the middle if you're doing one of the sizes that needs those. Otherwise, go ahead and work the next front post double crochet. And then work our V-stitch in this final post stitch over here. And then we'll finish off with our 3 single crochets at the end. 1, 2, 3. And then we continue working the rest of the panel as normal. Work back with single crochets. And then we are ready for the final row of the cable. So I will meet you back for cable row number 15. Cable row 15 begins by working 2 single crochets, and then we will work 2 front post double crochets. And it will say in the notes that you'll work the second one around the center single crochet of the front post V stitch that's 2 rows below. So that's exactly the same as what we did in a previous row where we had to work the front post double around the center single crochet again. So this is just the same as that. So really quickly, I'll just go through that again. We are going to do our first one around the post stitch. And then the second one, we're going to find that center single crochet and go around it, making sure we're going under the loop of the double crochet that was next to it right there. And then we will complete our double crochet around that. And those are our 2 front post stitches done. We'll skip the next 2. And then we will work a number of single crochets. And then we will be back at the 4 double crochets here in the center. That's going to then just be worked straight up and down. So we'll work 4 front post double crochets. Once we work those, we'll make sure we skip the next 4 stitches that were behind it, work a number of single crochets to the next section, And then we will work a 2 front post double crochet thing again. And that's again going to go, the first one will be around this center single crochet. So we'll yarn over, go around that center single crochet, do our double crochet, and then work our second double crochet around the next post stitch. We will skip 2 single crochets and then work a number of single crochets across, following our pattern telling us how many to do. And then all we have to do is repeat exactly what we did over here on this diamond. So we are now going to work our front post double crochet around this next front post double. Work the next front post double crochet around the center single crochet of that V stitch. Skip 2, work a number of single crochets across, then work 4 front post doubles across these 4 front post doubles here. Then we'll skip 4, 2, 3, 4, work a number of single crochets to the last part, and then we will work our final 2 front post double crochets around the center single and the last post stitch here. Skip 2, and then work 2 single crochets. And there you have it. That is the final row of your cable repeats. So from here on, all you're going to really do is just continue in pattern. You'll repeat rows 1 through 16, because remember the 16th row is just single crochets back across, as many times as the pattern tells you. And that will get you this beautiful, wavy, diamondy, clustered, beautiful cable here. I said beautiful twice. I'm sorry. It really is. It's such a great cable. I really love this. So hopefully that made a lot of sense, being able to work through each of those rows with you. And now I believe you're ready to tackle the rest of your sweater vest. While all even numbered rows are just working single crochets across, I know that there can be some difficulty in missing a few stitches, especially when you're working on the backs of these cable sections. Sometimes you can get confused as to which stitch to work into, or you might miss a stitch because of some weird like twisting or things like that that happen. So I wanted to show you a couple of the more commonly missed parts. So one thing is the part when we had the twisted crossed cables from the front. They oftentimes can create this kind of confusing gap that happens here in the back. So one thing to note is that you'll always see that there is this unworked set of single crochets. Those were the ones that were skipped when we worked the cable crossing. We're going to continue to leave those unworked. So make sure you don't accidentally work any stitches in here. The other thing to note is that it sometimes can be hard to tell where you insert your hook and which stitch to go into, what's a stitch, what's not. So what I do is I always will turn my work to the top and I look for the V's that are always at the tops of every stitch. So every crochet stitch should still end with a V loop at the very top. So here I can count that I've worked a stitch, so I should have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 stitches here across. So I'll need to make sure I work 8 stitches across there. So this one is going to go right here. So there's 1. Then we have 2, 3, And then if I'm not sure where to put it, I can make sure that I look above and see, okay, there's the V. So I want to make sure I work under that V right there. So we'll go underneath it. Make sure my hook is going under both loops. There's 4. Next one is right there. So we'll go underneath that one. 5. And then check to see the next one. It's going to be right there. So we're going to work into that one. 6. And then the final one should be right there. There's 7. Sorry, not the final one. The final one of the twisted cable part. But then we have this one to work into, and that makes the 8th one that I needed to work across for the ones that I was looking at before. So there should still be 8 stitches from before, just like when I counted earlier. And then on the front, that will make sure to keep the stitch count the same. So then that way, when we go back to work the next cable row, we're not off on our stitch counts. The other cable stitch that can cause some issues when it comes to working on the wrong side and making sure you're getting the correct number of single crochets is the front post cluster. So these clusters, just like any other stitch, will have the V's on top that will show you where they are. They're just maybe a little bit difficult to see, but if you look carefully, you can see that you have some V's going along here. So just like before, we will turn our work, make sure we're working under the V's here. So we've got that V, so we'll make sure we do a single crochet under that one. Look for the next V right there, and we'll work a single crochet under that one. Turn and look for the next V. So that's going to be this one right here, which can sometimes be easily missed if you're just looking at it from this direction. There it is. We'll turn and look for the next V, which should be the top of this cluster right here. So the cluster is just coming out of it there, but we'll make sure we work under that V, just those 2 loops there. Single crochet. And then we should see that we have another one right there. So single crochet. That's the one of the ones in between. And since there were 2 single crochets between each cluster, that means that there should be this one and then the one right next to it. You'll work into that one as well. And then we will look on top and see we've got our next V at the top of that cluster. Work our single crochet under that one. And then you've got some just regular stitches that are pretty easy to see. But there you have it. That makes sure that you get the correct number of single crochets along the tops of your clusters, so that way your stitch count stays the same. As I mentioned earlier in the video, the way that this panel is going to be constructed is that it's going to create a tapered waist. So that starts narrower at the waist and goes up until it hits the chest circumference that we need. To do that, we need to follow a particular increase pattern, and every size is going to have its own increase pattern depending on what row it says. So make sure you do pay attention to what your size says that you have chosen to make. So it might say increase every 11th row or every 14th row or something like that. But every increase is going to be done exactly the same way, and it's actually very simple to do. All you do is when you get to the end of a row and the next row is your increase row. So let's say I'm, on the 13th row and that's my increase row. I'll chain 1, make sure I turn. And in this very first single crochet, all I'm going to do is instead of working 1 single crochet, I'm going to work 2 single crochets. Woo! Super complicated, right? Yeah, just 2 single crochets in there. Then I complete the rest of the row exactly the same. I just follow in pattern. So if it's a right side row, then I'll make sure that I follow the cable pattern that I'm working on. If it's a wrong side row, it's even easier. It's just single crocheting all the way across. Now, the thing that you have to make sure you do is you have to remember you are on an increase row, which is why it's very important to keep track of which row number you're on, because I know this has happened to me where I remember to increase at the beginning, but then I just get into the groove of crocheting across, and then I get to the end and I just work a normal single crochet and I forget, oh right, this was an increase row. So I might accidentally, if I'm not paying attention, wind up with one side being increased and the other side staying the same and creating a weird looking trapezoidy sort of thing. And so I want to make sure you don't do that. But yeah, so anyway, so you've done 2 single crochets at the beginning. So I'll get all the way to the end here and show you what to do at the end. I have now worked all my single crochets all the way across to the end. I've got 2 stitches left. So what I'm going to do is show you how you now increase at the last part of the row. So what you'll do is you'll work into the second to last stitch like normal. But in this last stitch, you're going to work 2 single crochets. So I'll put 1 single crochet in there, and then I'll put a second single crochet in the same stitch. And voila, that's it. It's just like at the beginning. I just put 2 single crochets in the end and in the beginning, and that will widen it evenly on both sides. So then I will turn and do my chain, and I am back to the other side of my work. Once you turn and do your turning chain, you're then going to just have 1 extra stitch. So earlier I had 3 stitches before my marked stitch. Now I should have 4 stitches before my marked stitch. So I'll just work into each one of those like normal, and my stitch count will have gone up by 2 for the entire row, 1 on this end and 1 on the other end. And then I just continue crocheting in pattern like normal until I get to my next increase. And that's pretty much all there is to increasing for the body. Once you've built up the body of your panel, you are now ready to start shaping for the armholes. So to do that, you're going to basically just do some decreases on the beginning and on the ends of your panel. So to do the decreases, you're going to chain 1, and then we're going to single crochet 2 together. So how we do that is we'll first insert our hook into the first single crochet. We will yarn over, pull up a loop, leave that loop on our hook. Then we're going to go into the next single crochet. We will insert our hook, yarn over and pull up a loop. We'll now have 3 loops on our hook. So then we will yarn over and pull through all 3 loops, and that will decrease our stitch count by 1 on this side. The rest of the stitches, we will continue to just work in pattern all the way until the last 2 stitches of the row. So I will go ahead and work those off camera, and then I will show you what to do when you get there. All right, so I am reaching the end here, and I now have 2 single crochets left. So I'm going to single crochet those 2 together by doing what we did at the beginning of the row, where we will insert, yarn over and pull up a loop, leave it on our hook, insert into the next one, yarn over, pull up a loop. 3 loops are now on our hook, yarn over, pull through all 3, and that will decrease by another stitch. And then we will turn and do our chain 1, and then we will continue following our pattern across. And what you'll also need to pay attention to in your pattern is the decreases are going to be different for each size. So you'll check to see, okay, it'll say whether or not you need to increase every row for this many rows, every other row for this many, and so on and so forth. So what that will mean is that when it's increasing every row, it's doing a more dramatic decreasing for every row. It's going to do a more dramatic decrease, and then it will be more gradual when it goes to decreasing every other row until you reach the width of the shoulder. And then if you need to, you just basically work the remainder without any decreases. Once you finish your armhole shaping, it's going to have this nice curve going along. It might curl on you a bit, but that's okay. That'll come out later in blocking and when you're working the ribbing around the armhole. But once we get to the point where we're done with the armhole shaping on the back panel, we are now ready to do the neck hole opening for the back. So to do this, what you'll do is it's going to say to work in pattern for a number of stitches. So you'll follow whatever stitch count it tells you in your pattern. So for me, I'm going to go ahead and chain 1. And then I'll work to what would be the stitch marker, but at this point, I don't have enough stitches to really need that. I can just count and be like, okay, there we go, I reached my end. So then I'll work across the cable like I would normally, and then only work the number of stitches that it tells me. Once I'm there, I'll stop And so I'll meet you at that point to show you what to do next. I'm coming to the last stitch that my pattern would tell me to go to. Okay, once I reach that last stitch, I stop working into any further stitches. And so then what I'll do is I will turn, chain one, and then just work back across just these stitches. So I'll go ahead and do that. Turn. Do my chain one, and then start working into that first single crochet. And then I will work single crochets all the way across to the end. And then once I get to the end, I'm then going to turn, chain one, work back in pattern across to just this point again. Then I'm going to turn, chain one, and then work my final row of single crochets all the way to the end. And then that's going to give me a little bit of shaping here for the back of the neck. And then once I do that, I will meet you back up and show you what to do for the other side of your sweater vest. I just finished working my rows to form the neck shaping. And one thing I would like to note here before moving to the next part is that the way that the pattern is set up, you should be ending on a row 15, row 16 repeat at the very end on either panel. If you've made any adjustments to length by changing the row count, however, you are going to end in a different part of the cable. But if you follow the same row count that's in your pattern, you should always end with this. So you'll have these final two clusters in the middle, plus one extra row of these front post stitches. So now that I've reached the end of my shoulder here, I'm just going to fasten off. And then in the pattern, it tells you to then count over a certain number of stitches and then join with a slip stitch into that stitch you just ended up on. So for mine, I'm going to count over from this part of the shoulder. So if I get in closer here, there we go. We can see that this single crochet was worked as the last one of this row. So we're going to start counting right here in this single crochet. So you would count over however many we need. So, okay. And then once we're there, what we're going to do is we're going to find that final stitch we just counted, and that's going to be where I'm going to just kind of insert my hook to hold on to it while I prepare my yarn. Then I take my yarn, actually zoom back out a bit, and we're going to join with the slip stitch. So what I like to do just to kind of secure it is go ahead and put a slip knot on there. Place that on my hook. Okay. And then draw it through. And then you're going to chain one. So grabbing this yarn, going to chain one to secure it. And then you work a single crochet into that first stitch to start. Go ahead and like to wrap it around the tail just to kind of get that even more secure. And there we go. So now that I have my first single crochet, all I then have to do is just single crochet into each stitch all the way to the end of this side of the panel. Just like what's over here on this side, we are going to have the same stitch count as what's over here. So that same stitch count should be over here as well. And then we're going to work the same number of rows so that it matches. So here I did 4 rows, so there should be 4 total rows over here. So you work it exactly the same as what you did here, just without the cabling. And then once you do that, you're going to fasten off, and then you are done with making the back panel. So then you're ready to start making your front panel. Once you've worked up your front panel, which is pretty much identical to your back panel, except that the cable is going to be on the opposite side, you will do the armhole shaping just like you did on the back panel, but it'll tell you in the pattern to do it up to a certain point. And then after that, you are going to start doing the V-neck shaping while incorporating the rest of the armhole shaping as well. So you'll have 2 things going on, but the pattern will just be talking about the V-neck shaping. So I'll be showing you that on camera. And then after that, we will be ready to move on to piecing the 2 panels together. To begin the neck shaping, what you're going to do is the pattern will tell you a certain number of stitches that you will work across, and then you will stop and then turn to continue building out this left shoulder on the front panel. What I go ahead and do is I count out the number of stitches that I need from my pattern, and then I mark the stitch that's right next to it, so that way I know that's the stitch I first don't work into. So I'm going to go ahead and get started on that here. So take my stitch marker out here. All right, go ahead and get that over there. Okay. All right, so I'll do my chain one, continuing with my armhole shaping, which on this row for me is just a regular single crochet across. I am now approaching the stitch marker that tells me that I have reached the end. So I'll go ahead and work in the last single crochet right before it. And then I'll stop working new single crochets in this row, and instead I will turn and do my chain one. And then this is where we'll start shaping for the V-neck. So on every wrong side row, you're going to do a decrease on the side with the V-neck. So in these first two single crochets, I'm going to do a single crochet two together. So I'll insert my hook into the first one, draw up a loop, go into the next one, draw up another loop. There'll be 3 loops on the hook, yarn over, and just draw through all 3. Then it says you will work in pattern the rest of the way across. So then I just work 1 single crochet into each single crochet, making sure to pay attention to any armhole shaping on the other side that I might need to do. For me, I just need a single crochet all the way across without any sort of decrease over here, so I can just go ahead and do that. I'll work that up off camera and meet you up for the next row to tell you what to do there. I am now coming to the end of this row. We'll go ahead and work my final single crochet in that last stitch. And then I will turn and do my chain one. There we go. And then what's great about the right side rows is that there's no decreasing when it comes to the neck. You'll still, of course, pay attention to the armhole and decreasing if you need to do that. But when I get all the way to the end here, I just work a single crochet into that final stitch from the previous row. So I'll go ahead and work that off camera and then meet you back. All right, I am coming up to the end here. So I will work my single crochet into that final stitch. And then I will turn and do my chain one. And then basically that is going to be my repeat for the next several rows. So your pattern is going to tell you that you'll repeat rows 2 and 3. So you'll do a decrease on the side with the neck, then you'll do 1 row without decreasing, and then you just repeat that for a certain number of rows. So I'll go ahead and do my decrease. And then for most of the sizes, there's going to be a few extra rows that don't do any decreasing because you'll have reached the width of the neck that you need to reach, but it didn't, divide out evenly without any remainders with the number of rows you need for the depth of the neck. So there are a couple of those that will need those extra rows. A few of the sizes, luckily, divided perfectly evenly. So once they're done with all the decreasing for the neck, they're just done. And so then they get to move on to the next shoulder. So I will go ahead and work up my sizes left shoulder here, shaping the neck and the armhole as I go. Once I'm finished with that, I will meet you back up for the next part of shaping the V-neck. Okay, so I finished working the rest of the shoulder, the left shoulder here, with the V-neck shaping along this edge, and then finishing up the armhole shaping along this edge. And then I worked my final row, worked my last stitch, and then just cut off the yarn at the end and just pulled it through. So once I'm done with that part, I'm now ready to continue the other half of our V-neck. So what I'll do is go back to where my stitch was marked before. So this stitch is the one just to the left of the last one worked in. And what I want to make sure I'm doing is I'm on the right side because the next row we made was a right side row. So we're going to continue this right side pattern here. So what I'll do is I'll go ahead and remove the stitch mark from that stitch. I can go ahead and put my hook through there to join. Take my yarn end here and I will make a slip knot. Once I make the slip knot, I will use my hook to pull it through to join. To me, that just makes a much more secure join than just pulling in the yarn. So once I do that, I then go ahead and do a chain 1, and then I will do a single crochet into that very first stitch. And then the pattern will tell me to work in pattern all the way across, including continuing the armhole shaping on the other side. So whatever armhole shaping I was doing before, I need to continue with that. So what I'll do is I'll work the pattern. So in this case, it's single crochets until I get to the cable. And then I'll work the next row of the cable and then continue to the edge of the armhole. So I'll go ahead and work all of that across off camera. Once I get to the end, I will show you how to do the next row. I've made it now to the end of the first row. So what I'll do is I'll do my turn and chain 1. And then what it says to do in the pattern is to work a single crochet all the way across, or basically work in pattern, but it's a wrong side row. So it's essentially just single crochets. And you'll do that all the way until you get to the last 2 single crochets, because that's going to be on the side of the neck. Once we get to those 2, we're actually going to do a decrease. So I'll go ahead and work across to those last 2. All right, so I'm coming up to my last stitches here. So I'm going to work 1 more here, and I should now have 2 stitches left of this row. So those 2 stitches, I will work a decrease. So I'll do my single crochet 2 together by inserting, pulling up a loop, insert into that last one, and try again. Need to get under both loops. There we go. Okay. Pull up another loop. There will be 3 loops. Yarn over, pull through all 3, and that will be my decrease. Then I'll go ahead and do my turn and chain 1. And then for the remainder of this, I essentially am going to do exactly the same as I did on the other side. So every right side row is going to just go all the way across, working in pattern, continuing with your armhole shaping. And then every wrong side row, you repeat what we just did, where we end with a decrease in the last 2 stitches, because then that will mirror the decrease pattern on the other side to create that nice, lovely V shape. And then, of course, once you get to the top, you're going to fasten off like you did over here. And then your front panel is completely done. And then you are ready for seaming. Once you have both of the shoulders completed with the V-neck now in the middle for your front panel, you should have fastened off at the end here. You'll now have a nice, beautiful front panel here. And now it is time to start seaming them together with the back panel. So I've got my back panel here. So in the pattern, it's going to say right sides facing. What that means is that you place the right sides of your panels facing each other. And then it's going to say wrong sides out. So that means you're seeing all of what's going to be the inside of the vest outward. So then that way, any seaming that we do appears on the inside of our garment rather than on the outside. So then when we're done, we'll turn it back right side out, and then it'll look nice and polished without any of these ridges. Now, you can use any seaming method you really honestly want to. In my pattern, I just go ahead and say we're going to slip stitch them together because that's just my preference. I'm not a big fan of doing whip stitch or mattress stitch very much because I don't know, I don't enjoy them as much. But if you would prefer to do that, then feel free, go ahead, do that. But I'm going to be demonstrating the slip stitching here on camera. So it doesn't really matter which way you start. You can start by seaming up here at the shoulders, and then move on to seaming up the sides or vice versa. But both methods are essentially going to be the same. What you'll want to do is match basically row to row. And an easy way to kind of do that is just to kind of line up the corners here. And I just find where they match up. So once I find that, I'll pretty much just get my hook here. I'll insert it through both of those stitches. And then I'll go ahead and pull my yarn. Okay, secure it with a slip knot. Come on, there we go. Oops, backwards. There we go. Okay, so I secure it with a slip knot here. And then what I'll do is I will slip, make a chain one. And then just for good measure, I go ahead and slip stitch into the same one that I just worked into to join, just to add a little bit of extra security. And then I basically just go through and I go row by row, making sure I insert my hook through both rows that match up, pull my yarn through, and just make a slip stitch. And then I go into the next row, make sure that they're lined up, and make a slip stitch. And then I just do that, making sure that I match row for row. Now what's great about the single crochet rows is that because the chain one alternates like how it forms on the side, so you'll have kind of this dip and then you'll have this little bump right here. So as long as you're matching dip to dip and bump to bump, you're pretty much going to stay aligned all the way down the side. Now that's going to be true whether you're doing the slip stitch join, whip stitching, mattress stitching, whatever. But that's going to be the way that I keep track to make sure that I am matching row for row. If for some reason you ever do get off track, just don't fret too much about it. Being off by one row or two rows in one spot or two spots is not going to make a big deal. If you want to, some people will also put stitch markers along the side, just so that way they're marking certain places. That way when they get to it, they know, okay, I should be lined up right here. But for me, because of those bumps and dips, it's pretty easy for me to keep lined up here. All right, so I'm gonna do that down the side here. And then once I'm done, so let's see, that's a dip. So it should go through the dip right here. There we go. So once I'm done with that, I will meet you up and show you how to do the shoulder seams. So I finished seaming the side, and all I did at the end was fasten off and pull the yarn through, and then later I'll weave that in to get it nice and secure. But in the meantime, what I would do is normally go to the other side and start seaming that together, but I want to go ahead and show you how to do the shoulder. So with the sides, what you're doing is matching row for row, but the shoulders, what you're doing is matching stitch for stitch. So if you look at the tops of the panels here, you can see that each of the stitch rows has V's running along. So as long as you're matching the V in both rows, both sets of stitches the same, then you should be good. So what I'll do is I'll go ahead and start over here on the corner with the neck and work my way out. So I'll go ahead and stick my hook through both loops of the first stitch in both sides here. And then I'll grab my yarn and make a slip knot here. Use my hook, pull that slip knot through, and then I will chain one. Sorry, this yarn is very smooth, but it does have a tendency to cling to itself. So sometimes you got to make sure you're grabbing the working yarn and not the tail on accident. So we'll go ahead and chain one. And then just to add some security, I will work my first slip stitch through both of those first stitches there. Find it there. There we go. Okay. Right. And if it gets like loose or anything like that at any point, what you can do is just kind of, tighten things back up as needed, because in the end, you're going to be sewing all of these loose ends through, and then that'll secure it. And then when you launder it, it'll tighten it even more. So what I'll do is I'll go through and just be like, okay, so I've worked through the first stitch. So now I'm going to find the next V that I haven't worked through. So it's going to be, let me actually zoom in a bit here. There we go. All right, so we should be able to see that I've already worked through my first V. So now I'm going to work through my second V. So I'll go through the second one here and find the second one on the next panel as well. So I'll go through both of those, and then I'll yarn over and slip stitch through both. And then basically just matching stitch for stitch like I did when I matched row for row. I'm just going to keep them as lined up as I can. And also use stitch markers if you need to. But I find that they're not really necessary as long as you're just paying attention to those V's. You should be able to easily and quickly find where you need to insert your hook through both panels and just slip stitch together. And then you just do that all the way across all of the shoulder stitches, and you will have seamed up your shoulders. So you'll do that, get to the end, fasten off like you did with the side seam. And then you'll do the repeat of that on the other side. So you'll do that for the other side and the other shoulder. Once you do that, you are then ready to do the finishing touches of the armhole ribbing, followed by the neck hole ribbing. So I will go ahead and work this off camera and meet you up for those parts. After seaming your panels together, what you'll then want to do is turn your vest right side out. So you should be able to see your cabling, and you'll also see that the seaming should now be more of like a groove rather than the ridges that you made with the slip stitches. I've gone ahead and worked the next part on one of the armholes. So this armhole already has the ribbing worked around it. So I will show you on the other armhole how to get started on that. So one thing you're going to want to do is find the seam join where you seamed the side at the bottom of the armhole. So you're going to see that you'll have kind of like this groove right here, and then you're going to have like all of these rows going around. So you don't have to be like super critically accurate as long as you're basically working it into the center. So what you're going to do is get your hook and go ahead and insert it into that seam location. Grab our yarn, create our slip knot here, pull it through to join, a little tight there, okay. Once we pull it through to join, we are then going to chain one, and then we will work a single crochet back into the same place where we joined. So just kind of shoving our hook into that seam center spot right there. Insert, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through one, or sorry, pull through two, and we will create our first single crochet. So what's really important is that you have an even number of single crochets around. So if you do get off at any point in time throughout, it's really not that big of a deal. But as long as you end with an even number, the ribbing will still work out. So I've got that. So then what I'm going to do is find the first single crochet side of my row. So we see here that the first single crochet row would be right here next to where the seam joined it. So I'm going to work another single crochet into that one. And then I find the next row and I work into it. So I'm going to find the next one, which would be, it looks like this one right here. So I'll join into that one. So there's another single crochet. And then I find the next one will be this one. So, or wait, no, actually, sorry, I skipped one. Forget that there's going to be kind of like a little tighter one right there that I'm going to work into. I believe. Yes, I think so. Yeah, I'll just go ahead and do it. Like I said, as long as I have an even number, that's really all that matters. So I'll do that, work a single crochet, work a single crochet into the side of the next row, and then keep doing that all the way until I get to the shoulder seam. So I'll keep working into the sides of rows. And just like earlier with the seaming, oh, I accidentally grabbed the tail there. Don't want that. Back out, I'll be weaving that in a different way later. Okay, so once I do that, I'm going to look at the sides here, and there should still be that kind of bump and dip pattern. So right in here is kind of dips down. So I'm going to work into the dip down one. And then I'm going to work into the one that kind of bumps up. So it's going to be this bigger gap right there. So really, you almost think of it as like there's going to be a tighter one. So you'll work into the tight stitch on the side. And then you work into the bigger, looser gap stitch right there. So if you keep alternating that way, working into the tight one, and then working into the bigger open one, and just keep doing that, you should get the correct number, or at least an even number of stitches around. So I'll work that until I get to the shoulder seam, and then I'll show you what to do at that point. I'm coming up now to the shoulder seam, so it looks like I have about 3 more rows before that happens. So I'll go ahead and work those last 3 single crochets. And then we can see here that, I just kind of tighten that, I've got a row here that's joined with the shoulder seam, and then I've got another row here. So I've got this single crochet row right here. And then if I go to there, there's like where it was joined, and then I've got the single crochet over here. So what I'm going to do is actually work a single crochet into that last single crochet row. Then I'm just going to kind of insert my hook into the center of that seam, just somehow in the center, and then go ahead and pull up a loop, and then I'll go ahead and finish my single crochet. So that will then match the one that's on the opposite side on the bottom to keep our number even. Then I'll work into the next single crochet that was joined to that seam. And then I just continue working in the side of each row like I was before. So I look for, the dip here, and then I look for the bump right there. And then I just keep working into the sides like that, all the way until I get back to the beginning. So I will go ahead and work the rest of these rows, work into the rest of the sides of these rows until I get back to the beginning, and then I will show you what to do next. Okay, I'm coming around now to where I'm almost back to the beginning. So I'm just working those final single crochets into those last rows. So that looks like, okay, so if I look at the top here, we can see the V of our first stitch. Some people, if it helps them, go ahead and put like a stitch marker in there when they first make it. I didn't really need to, but if that helps you, feel free to do that. But what I'll do is work into the last 2 rows that I've got here. And then once I do that, I'm then going to insert my hook into that first stitch and do a slip stitch to join. A little tight there, but go. Oop, only went through the back loop. I'm gonna go through both loops. Come on. Ooh, I made that a little tight. Okay, that's okay. Okay, got it. Okay, so then I go ahead and slip stitch, and now we're going to work the join as you go ribbing. So how this works is that every row that you make is going to match 1 single crochet. So every 2 rows is going to be 2 single crochets. So to do that, the first thing we need to do is chain out what we need for our rib. So we need 4 stitches for our rib. So what we'll do is chain 4, and then we chain 1 more to be the turning chain. So then we'll work a single crochet into the second chain from our hook. We'll go ahead and do that there. And then you work a single crochet into each chain down. So then we have 2, 3, 4. And now what we need to do is we need to join to our body, to the armhole edge here, with a slip stitch, and then join with a slip stitch to the next one to form our next row. So we're going to insert our hook into that first single crochet. So that was the one that was joined, the very first single crochet from earlier. We'll go ahead and insert our hook and slip stitch, and then we'll insert our hook into the next one and slip stitch. So we should now have worked 2 slip stitches along the side. We'll go ahead and turn. And then what the pattern will tell you to do is to skip those first 2 slip stitches. The way I look at it is I always know that I have a 4 stitch count. So I basically just look for these 4 stitches on the rib, and that way I know I'm skipping the first 2. So what we're going to do is now work our linked slip stitch row. So every wrong side row will be linked slip stitches like the bottom ribbing. So in the very first one, we're going to make sure we just do our single crochet like normal to begin. Then to work our linked slip stitch, we insert back into the same stitch we just worked that single crochet, yarn over and pull up a loop. We'll have 2 loops on our hook. Then insert into the next stitch to work, yarn over and pull up another loop. So we should have 3 loops on our hook. And then we'll take that third loop and pull it through both of these 2 loops to complete the slip stitch. So I'll show that again. Insert into the previously worked stitch, pull up a loop, insert into the next stitch, pull that loop through everything on your hook. And then we do it one more time into that final stitch. So we'll insert our hook and pull up a loop in this previously worked stitch, insert through both loops of our last stitch here. Sometimes I have to kind of turn it to see. Okay. And 2 loops. Oh my goodness, I am so sorry about that, but there we go. Whew, both loops, yarn over, pull through that one and everything else. So we got those. So now we should have 4 stitches, our 3 linked slip stitches plus the single crochet that started it. Then what we'll do is we will chain 1, turn our work. We should now see that we have the little double V's of our linked slip stitches there. So then what we'll do is we'll work kind of like we did with the bottom ribbing, but we're doing single crochets instead of double. We're going to work into the back loops only of each stitch. So I'll go ahead and insert through that back loop, work my single crochet, then insert into the back loop of the next one, work another single crochet, and just do that across all 4 stitches. 2, 3, and 4. Okay. So now that we've done that, we've already worked our way over to working the stitch. So now what we need to do is we need to slip stitch into the next one to join this to the edge. So slip stitch, and then we'll need to slip stitch into the next one. So then that way we can work the next row. So yeah, so there we go. So then we just repeat rows 2 and 3. So we'll turn, work a linked slip stitch row. So I'll go ahead and do that. So find my 4 stitches here. 1, 2, 3, 4. Work a single crochet first, then do a linked slip stitch. So pull up a loop in the previous one, slip stitch into the next one, pull up a loop in the previous one, slip stitch into the next one, pull up a loop in the previous one, slip stitch into the last one. That one should hopefully be a little easier. Yes, it was. Okay, there we go. Woo! And then I go ahead and chain 1, turn my work, and then just work single crochets into the back loop only of each stitch. So go ahead and find that back loop, single crochet, And it's a good idea to go ahead and make sure you're doing 4 stitches. It's a very small stitch count, so it should be pretty easy to track. But as long as you're doing 4 stitches each row, your ribbing should stay even all the way around. So once I've made it to those 4, I then find the next 2 single crochets that don't have anything in them yet. So it'll be this one and this one. So I'll go ahead and work a slip stitch into the first one, and then work a slip stitch into the next one. And then I just continue that pattern. So you're going to continue basically repeating back and forth, just doing linked slip stitches and then single crochet back loop only, back and forth all the way around your armhole. And then you're going to get all the way back here. And then once we get back here, I'm going to show you what to do to finish and join the ribbing on the armhole. Now I have worked the ribbing all the way around, so I just have to do another repeat of row 3, and then I should have 2 more of these single crochet stitches on the edge here. So once I work that row 3 repeat, I will slip stitch into both of those, turn, work 1 more repeat of row 2, and then I'll be ready to seam this together. So I'm going to go ahead and work that here for you. So row 3 repeat is single crocheting in the back loops only here. So I'll do that across these 4. And I should have those 2 left, so I will go ahead and slip stitch into those. Turn. Work my repeat of row 2, so single crochet, linked slip stitches in the rest. And there we go. And then what we will do is we are going to do a chain 1, and then I'm going to turn. And then what I'll do is we're going to join these together. So we're going to find that the first row here had some free loops from the chain that we created. So there should be 4. So we'll find there's 1, 2, 3, 4. And then the one we just created should have the back loops that we would normally work into. So what we'll do is instead of working single crochets into those back loops, we'll insert our hook into the back loop and through the first free loop of that first row. So our hook should be through both of those rows just like that. Then we're going to yarn over, pull a loop through both of those to form a joining slip stitch. And then we'll do that again. So we'll go through the back loop and through the second free loop of row 1. Yep. And pull a loop through to form a joining slip stitch. And we'll do that 2 more times. Back loop, free loop, join with slip stitch. Then we'll do 1 more, that final back loop. Sometimes it's a little tough to see, so you just kind of have to turn it. Kind of force your hook in there. There we go. I got it through there. And then through the last free loop here, join with the slip stitch. And because of the way that the ridging works here, because they kind of look like these little double ridges here, it honestly doesn't add much thickness to it. So it still blends a little like it's part of the actual ridge of that ribbing. And then what you do is you'll just basically fasten off, leaving yourself enough of a tail to weave in later. Pull it through, tighten that. And then when you go to weave in that later, you can weave it through to kind of fill in this gap that might form right here. You'll just kind of like work your yarn thread through there. So then that way you can kind of cover that up with that little bit of extra yarn. And then it'll create a nice, relatively seamless looking join, which will be under the arm anyway. So it's not like if it's not perfect, it'll really matter much. But once you do that, you will now have your armhole ribbing completely done. And then you'll just do that for the other side. And then once you do that for both sides, you'll now be ready to do the neck ribbing. The V-neck ribbing is going to be worked almost identically to the armhole ribbing. We're going to have the same number of stitches in the rib, and we'll be working our way all the way around. To do that though, we're going to have to do a little something different here at the bottom of this V-neck. So if you look really closely here, the bottom of the V-neck should have 2 stitches in the middle. Those 2 stitches are going to be where we decreased on one side and decreased on the other side of our shoulder. So these 2 stitches form the middle. So if we look at these 2 stitches, the one we're going to want to start in is the one here on the left. So what we'll do is we'll actually insert our hook into that left stitch, create our slip knot, join here with that slip stitch, and then we will chain 1, there we go, chain 1, there we go, and then we will work a single crochet into that same stitch we just joined into. Yep. And then we will work a single crochet evenly all the way around. So just like with the other armhole stitches, we're going to try to work a single crochet into the side of each row. And so that should give us an even stitch count when we work all the way around. So what I'll do is I'll show you how to do the sides of the row, how we get to these corners here, what we do there, how we get across the back, this corner, down here. Then I will show you the next steps after that. So to do the sides of the row, just like any of the others, one of the things we look for is we have these bigger gaps and we have these little gaps. So we just worked into a kind of not really side of a row. We worked into like the previous row, but the first one we're going to actually work into is going to be this one right here. That's going to be the very first single crochet row that was joined into this stitch when we made this side of the shoulder shaping. So go ahead and work a single crochet into that one. Then the next side of the row is going to be this big gap right here. So I'll work this one into the next big side gap. And then now we'll have a smaller side. So we'll go ahead and work a single crochet into the smaller gap. And then we have the bigger gap again. So then we'll work in the big one. So we'll just keep alternating, working in the small side stitch and the big open side stitch. And that should give us a roughly correct stitch count. Just like with the armholes though, if you find that you don't have the exact stitch count perfect, it's really not that critical. As long as you basically get an even number, you should be good, because in the end you're going to be joining and sewing things down and it's all going to look really good anyway, no matter what. All right, so I'm going to do that across the sides of this part of the V-neck, and I'll show you what to do once we get to the corner. All right, I've come now to the last 2 single crochets along my edge, so I'm going to go ahead and do my 2 slip stitches there. And then we'll turn around and finish with our final row 2 repeat. Okay, once you get that done, then what you're going to do is basically just fasten off and leave yourself a nice long tail of yarn. I just go really extra cautious, and then I just pull that all the way through to end it. And then we'll go ahead and grab our yarn needle, our tapestry needle here. And then what we're going to need to do is sew this down. So this does not come to this nice little point because what you've done is you've actually created an angle that goes to the right angle to the right, another one that goes to a right angle to the left. So actually they overlap each other. So you may have seen this in some other sweater patterns, like if you go to the store and see some of them have that little overlap. And then what they do is they join it by sewing almost like a little square around it or a little diamond in the middle. So that's exactly what we're going to do here. So one thing to make sure you do is that as you sew this down, you are going through both pieces of whatever you're sewing. So whether you're sewing it to the edge here of the vest or you're sewing to the ribbing, you make sure you're going through both so that way you're actually fastening them together. So here, I'll go ahead and line up my ribbing on top. And really it doesn't matter if you line this on top or this on top. I go ahead and do this just because this is already on top. But really it's up to you. It's a design choice, but I'm going to go ahead and do it this way. So I will line it up here and kind of find where it would naturally go in. So it would naturally go in probably through this stitch and then through this part of the vest. Go ahead and insert my yarn and pull through, just kind of secure it down. Then from here, I can decide whichever direction I want to go. So I might go ahead and just seam all the way up here just to join the two ribbings. So I'm going to keep those lined up here and just go through ribbing in the back and then through my ribbing. Oh, come on. Yeah, this is going to be a little bit finicky, but if you can have the patience with it, it's going to look pretty good. So go through both ribbings here, draw up a loop or pull the yarn through, go back through and weave this direction. Actually, let's see, is that should be lined up like that. There we go. Through this direction here. And I'll be back through here. Okay. All right. The next thing you're going to see is that if you go on the opposite side, this should be lined up like this. So this will line up with the edge of the seam of the sweater neck, and then this will overlap with the ribbing just on the opposite side. So if we go through, we're going to see that we will need to insert our needle through both of those. Oh, my yarn fell out of my needle. Oh, oopsie. Don't worry, I'll get that. Okay. It's kind of slippery yarn, so sometimes it just slips right out of the needle. And that's okay, you just put it right back in, right back through. There we go, nice and secure. Then I turn around and I look to see how this is lined up. I'll go ahead and sew it going down this edge here, back and forth. Now I should be where I'm at this final edge here. That's going to be where we would sew along the edge of the vest and also through the ribbing that'll be lying on the back. And there's no real precise exact way to do this. It really is just sew it down to where it looks lined up and good, and that's good enough. And that's exactly how I do it. So I'll turn it around here and see that I've sewn it down there. And then I've got one final area here, and that's going to be along this edge right here, sewing the front ribbing down to the edge of the vest here. So I'll go ahead and looks like to go through that one. There we go. All right, and then I will go through here and through the edge of the vest there. Sew that down, come back through, coming through the vest and that. Make sure it's coming through. Yep, okay. And then through here. And the vest. Go. And then one more. Line that up there. And there we go. And then I might just do another pass through like so, just to get the yarn onto the inside, where I can then weave it in and hide that tail. That would be then the last step for you. I'll just take my yarn out so I can spread this out to show you what it should look like now. That gives us this, you know, not world's prettiest join, but it does create the overlap that then lines it up so that it creates a perfect V rather than having like a little scrunchy thing or having to do any sort of short row shaping or anything like that here. Then once you do that, you are done with crocheting your sweater vest. So then what you can do is you can weave in all of your loose yarn ends like I still need to do here. You can launder it. I would say definitely wash it in cold water. That way you can minimize shrinking. If you do run it through the dryer, definitely run it through a low heat, or even better, just do maybe like an air fluff without any heat and then lay it out flat to finish drying, just so that way you can definitely minimize any sort of shrinking that might happen. But otherwise, thank you for joining this tutorial video. Please click like and subscribe if you found this to be very helpful. I do plan to come out with some more tutorial videos with future patterns. Thank you and have a wonderful day.